There are moments in the vast chronicle of the cosmos when reality seems to hesitate, as though the fabric of existence itself recognizes an intruder who does not belong. It begins with a tremor too delicate for instruments, felt only by the quiet spaces between atoms. Across the void, where the Astronomican's pale beacon claws its desperate path through the warp, a new radiance stirs, cold, flawless, unblinking. It is not the glow of a star, nor the whisper of a demon's grin pressing through unreality. It is something older, something impossibly calm, something that refuses to be defined by the madness surrounding it. The Imperium's augurs detect the anomaly only in fragments. A flicker in deep space Uspax returns. An inexplicable stillness within the tides of the warp. A silence so complete that even the demons recoil. A shape forms at the heart of that unreal quiet, a man, or the memory of one, forged from cerulean light and boundless awareness. Dr. Manhattan steps into Warhammer 40K, not with thunder or proclamation, but with the gentle inevitability of an equation resolving itself, as though the galaxy has always been waiting for him. And in that first indifferent heartbeat, countless fates shift. Some tighten, some unravel, and some cease to matter at all. The first thing the crew of Listening Post Epsilon 9 noticed was not light or movement or any traceable signal. It was the silence. A silence so complete it carved itself into the breath of every man and woman stationed there, as if the void outside had leaned in close and pressed a finger to its lips. The post drifted on the far fringe of Imperial territory, a skeletal structure of steel ribs and frost-stained viewports, held together more by prayer than engineering. Its crew was accustomed to the shrieks of garbled vox echoes carried across the warp, to the ghostly harmonics that sang through their hull whenever a storm passed too near. But this silence felt intentional, shaped, almost sculpted into the air. Vox Officer Lorian was the first to sense it. One moment he was adjusting a cracked Auspex rune, the next he was staring at the display as its readings slid down to 0. Not fluctuating, not failing, 0. An impossible baseline, perfect in its certainty. He tried to tap the panel, but the machine spirit didn't protest. It simply remained still, as though resting in the presence of something it did not dare resist. Others felt it soon after, the sudden weightlessness of the air, the absence of the low mechanical hum they'd lived beside for years, the way even their own heartbeats sounded quieter than they should. They exchanged glances tinged with fear. Nothing in the Imperium ever went quiet without reason. Lorian approached the main viewport with the hesitance of a man approaching an altar, unsure if he was meant to pray or flee. Beyond the thick, reinforced glass, the void stretched endlessly, a canvas of black, dusted with the faint shimmer of distant stars. But something about that view felt wrong. The stars did not twinkle. They did not drift. They simply existed in an unnatural stillness, as though suspended in a single frozen moment of time. And then he saw it, a faint cerulean glow at the edge of perception, not shining outward but radiating with the steady composure of a thought made manifest. At first it resembled a figure only in outline, a pale shape standing impossibly tall against the nothingness, the blue luminance casting subtle reflections along the viewport frame. The crew gathered slowly, compelled by the hypnotic quiet. No alarms sounded, for nothing within the listening post recognized this as danger. No runes pulsed, because the sensors could not decide if anything was there at all. The shape drifted closer at a pace that could not be measured, not walking nor flying, but arriving through some logic they could not name. and as he approached, the glow refined itself into the unmistakable form of a man. A man without suit or helm, without oxygen supply or protective fields. A man impossible by every known law. Dr. Manhattan stood before their station, suspended in the void with serene indifference, the blue of his skin unblurred by distance, his eyes calm as if he'd already seen them, already known them, already understood their fear. A murmur spread through the watchers, a hushed disbelief, half wrapped in awe. Some instinctively made the sign of the imperial Aquila, though their hands trembled. Others stared without blinking, terrified that any sudden movement might draw his attention. But Manhattan did not reach for them. He did not invade their minds or demand allegiance. He simply observed, head slightly inclined, as though studying the fragile metal shell housing the tiny sparks of human life within. In that moment, the crew felt the strange sensation of being acknowledged, not as soldiers or servants or sinners, but as phenomena, fleeting, intricate, and painfully mortal. Something shifted then, not in space, but in their perception. For a heartbeat, Lorien sensed the overwhelming impression of presence, not loud or invasive, but profoundly vast, as though an ocean had leaned close enough for him to feel the currents along his skin. He staggered back, gasping, and Manhattan's gaze flickered to him with the barest hint of curiosity. No anger, no pity, only recognition, and then, without sound or movement, he was inside. He did not breach the hull. No alarms triggered. No pressure readings changed. One moment he was outside, framed by the unending void, and the next he simply existed within the central observation chamber, as though the walls had forgotten they were supposed to be solid. The transition was so gentle that several crew members blinked in confusion, convinced their eyes had betrayed them, but he was there. Unmistakable, undeniable, a being of unfiltered radiance, standing upon the grated metal floor with bare feet that cast no shadow. The air around him shimmered subtly, not with heat, but with a clarity so intense it made everything else in the room seem slightly out of focus. The crew recoiled instinctively, boots scraping against the deck. A servitor in the corner sputtered, its cogitator sparking blue light in flawed imitation of the figure before it. Its limbs twitched in rapid, panicked cycles as if its machine spirit could not reconcile the man's presence with its limited programming. Manhattan glanced in the servitor's direction, and its seizures ceased instantly. Not repaired, not stabilized. It simply stopped, frozen mid-motion, as if held in suspension by an unseen hand. Commander Hestrel drew his sidearm, the action so ingrained that he only realized what he'd done after the weapon was raised. His breath caught in his throat. The last pistol trembled in his grip, its dim charge indicator flickering like a candle in a draft. He tried to speak, but the words that should have been familiar, identification codes, challenge phrases, warnings, dissolved before reaching his tongue. In the presence of this impossible man, protocol felt childish, ceremonial, irrelevant. Manhattan looked at him with a faint tilt of the head. Not a threat, not a reprimand. A simple acknowledgement of emotion already understood before it occurred. And with that single, passive gesture, Hestrel felt his fear double, not because Manhattan was hostile, but because he was not. There was no malice in his gaze, no struggle, no uncertainty, only an impossibly calm awareness, as though he were reading the outcome of Hestrel's panic from a book, written long before the commander had been born. Lorien could sense the pressure rising again, though there was no physical force behind it. It was the pressure of comprehension, of realizing that he stood before something that perceived time the way a cartographer perceives a map. Past, future, choice, none of it carried meaning to this being. Lorien stepped backward until his shoulders touched the cold bulkhead, the chill grounding him. He whispered a prayer under his breath, not out of faith but habit, an instinctive plea for guidance in a moment that felt like the pause before execution. Manhattan's gaze drifted around the chamber, studying each person with a detached curiosity. The cerulean glow along his skin pulsed softly, as if responding to some internal rhythm. No voice emerged from him, yet the room felt filled with an unspoken question, not directed at them, but at the universe itself. A question too vast for human minds to interpret. A question they were terrified he might answer. Technician Mara was the first to speak, her voice trembling as she whispered, "What are you?" The question hung in the air like a fragile offering. Manhattan turned toward her, his expression neither offended nor amused. If anything, it carried a faint echo of empathy, a distant understanding of the fear that shaped her words. He lifted a hand, and the gesture was so slow, so deliberate, that none of them flinched. Blue light traced the motion, shimmering faintly in the dim chamber, and then the lights failed, not with a flicker, not with a pop of blown fuses, but with total, immediate darkness. Every lumen strip, every auspex display, every machine spirit's glow vanished at once. The station plunged into a night deeper than any void outside, the kind of darkness that devoured orientation and reason. Panic erupted in gasps and muffled cries as hands scrambled along walls and consoles. In that suffocating black, only one thing remained visible: the steady, unwavering glow of Manhattan's body. His silhouette became a lighthouse in the chaos, a quiet star standing in the dead heart of the station. The faint outlines of the crew flickered in his blue radiance, their fear carved plainly across their faces, and then a single voice, impossibly calm, resonant not in air but in thought, echoed through each of their minds. "You are afraid." The moment stretched. Time itself seemed reluctant to advance, as though the station's descent and Manhattan's calm coexisted in two separate measures. The crew clung to what they could: railings, consoles, each other, yet none could find footing in the space between awe and terror. Hestrel's hand shook as he pressed against a panel, attempting to reroute emergency thrusters, only to find the circuits unresponsive, caught somewhere between life and the unnatural order that Manhattan carried like a shadow of inevitability. Even their prayers felt fragile, tiny sparks in a storm of logic and stillness that this being embodied. The cerulean light spread slowly through the chamber, spilling across walls and grates like water over stone, brushing over the crew in quiet absolution. No warmth accompanied it, only awareness, a gentle acknowledgement of their fear. Manhattan's eyes swept over each face, absorbing the small, human dramas of survival, the instinctive clinging to life and order, and yet he did not act to save or condemn. It was enough that they existed, however briefly. Beneath the weight of his attention, outside, the moon drew inexorably closer, its grey surface etched with craters and fissures that would soon claim the station. The vacuum beyond remained indifferent, as it had always been. Yet a strange pattern emerged in the shifting void, particles bending subtly around his form, the warped light reflecting truths the crew could not read. He moved slowly toward the viewport, and in that motion, Lorien felt as though he could sense Manhattan's comprehension of them all. A calm certainty that made panic feel absurd, yet undeniable. Every instinct screamed danger, yet the presence of the man in blue reframed what they knew about fear. Hestral tried to speak again, his voice barely a rasp in the tense quiet. You could save us. You could, can't you? The desperation carried in the tremor of his jaw, the wild hope in his eyes. And Manhattan's gaze met his, serene yet unyielding. It was neither affirmation nor denial. It was something older, something that could not be measured by mortal time or morality. I have already seen all outcomes. Manhattan's thought resonated, subtle and infinite. The falling, the fear, the panic, all of it exists only to be observed, not prevented. The crew's panic edged closer to hysteria, yet they could not tear their eyes away from him. Mara's fingers clutched the edge of the central console, her nails digging into metal. Then what are we supposed to do? She whispered, the words trembling under the weight of inevitability. Manhattan extended his hand slightly, the glow from his fingers rippling outward, brushing the deck with the soft pulse of a distant star. It was a gesture of acknowledgement, of witnessing. The station's tilt eased fractionally, giving the crew a fraction of control they had not expected, yet the downward pull persisted. Gravity, chance, fate, all continued their inexorable course. Yet somehow, under his observation, the descent no longer felt chaotic. It was precise, inevitable, and strangely comprehensible. The crew watched, breathless. As the barren moon's surface filled their viewports, the distance shrinking with a certainty no calculation could prevent. And in that moment, a profound realization settled over them like dust in sunlight. They were not in control. They never had been. Yet they were seen, acknowledged, understood not as soldiers, not as pawns of the Imperium, but as fleeting expressions of life, fragile yet undeniably present. And then the first fragments of ice and debris struck the hull, chimes of impact that echoed across the chamber, fragile yet terrifying. The station groaned, metal flexing under the inevitability of descent. The crew braced, hearts pounded, and in the blue radiance of Manhattan's calm, they waited not for salvation, not for death, but for the silent witness that had entered their world without footsteps, without warning, and without judgment. The news traveled faster than any ship or Vox signal could carry it. By the time the first Imperial fleet arrived at the coordinates of listening post Epsilon 9, fragmented reports had already turned into legend. Crews spoke in hushed tones of a man of impossible blue radiance, of a presence that had entered the void without violence, and of entire machine spirits faltering before him. The Imperium, a galaxy built upon certainty and hierarchy, recoiled at the unknown. Explorator fleets deployed in disciplined formation, their augurs and auspex arrays bristling with curiosity and suspicion. But even the most sophisticated instruments returned only contradictions. Where they expected readings, there were anomalies. Where they sought disruption, there was calm. Where they demanded explanation, there was only observation. The Adeptus Astra Telepathica dispatched psychers in controlled trance to sense him, to quantify his mind, to fit it into the catalogue of known realities. But even they faltered. Farseers of the Eldar whispered their disquiet, noting threads of possibility fraying too early, too cleanly, as though the cosmos itself hesitated at the man's presence. The psycher's visions were erratic, flashes of cataclysm and serenity intertwined, impossible to interpret, leaving them shivering and muttering fragments of prophecy that no senior censor could sanction. Each attempted probe into his essence only revealed the futility of comprehension. He was not alien. He was not divine in the way the Emperor was understood. He simply existed, a constant within an infinite variable, within the walls of a distant manufacturing world. Skittery observed the anomaly with mechanical precision, but even they faltered. Augmented sensors reported fluctuations that could not be measured. Data slates overloaded with parameters that defied calculation. The machine's collective logic circuits struggled against the quiet, the absence of expected interference, the stillness that contradicted every known law of the universe. Servitors whispered their prayers mechanically, reciting litanies meant to appease machine spirits, but nothing in their coded recitations could coax understanding. And yet the man moved through space as if he belonged everywhere, unbound by distance, unmoved by mortal concepts of order or threat. The fleets themselves hesitated on approach, held back not by orders but by instinct. Commanders reported strange phenomena. Navicomps momentarily freezing, thruster calibrations fluctuating without cause, lights dimming then brightening with no electrical explanation. The most daring officers attempted maneuvering in tight formations, only to find their ships subtly deflected. The course corrections they initiated dissolving under the quiet weight of his presence. Even the Emperor's most loyal servitors, custodian guards observing from orbit, recorded the event with silent awe, sensing something inhuman in its perfection. It was neither hostile nor benevolent, simply inevitable, as though the galaxy had always accounted for this visitor, and was only now noticing the ledger of his arrival. Everywhere the Imperium reached, the same pattern repeated, meticulous observation rendered impotent by the scale of perception that this man carried. To the mortals, it appeared as if the cosmos itself had bowed slightly, rearranging physics, silencing engines, softening chaos, and freezing even the frenzied orc's pulse for a heartbeat. And in that observation, the crews realized something they could not name. Their understanding of reality, of strategy, of survival was insufficient. He could not be fought, reasoned with, bargained for, or catalogued. He simply existed, and that existence demanded acknowledgement. Amid the uncertainty, the whispers grew into rumors. Some suggested he was a fragment of the Emperor's own mind, a shard lost to time and returned. Others, more heretical, claimed he was a herald of something beyond the warp, a truth too immense to confront. Yet all agreed on one thing: the galaxy had never seen anything like him, and whatever the Imperium tried, they could only bear witness. The calm precision of his presence became the lens through which every human, psyche, and machine had to reassess the impossible. The fleets loomed at a distance, powerful yet irrelevant in his shadow. The Imperium, confident in centuries of dominance and faith, now faced a being who existed outside the scales of power they had always measured. Their weapons, rituals, and hierarchies were inadequate, and each observer felt, with quiet terror and fascination, that the man in blue might never engage, might never act, and yet his very observation was reshaping every outcome before it could unfold. Inside the command decks of the fleets, panic and wonder interwove like twin serpents, twisting every thought the officers dared to entertain. Tactical officers pored over Auspex readings that made no sense. Signals returned, scrambled, or vanished entirely, only to reappear with the faintest delay, as if time itself hesitated before delivering them. Every psychic probe, every mathematical prediction, every mathemated attempt at control faltered. The psychers whispered fragments of visions, trembling as their minds were assaulted by impossible simultaneities, They perceived their fleets destroyed and saved in the same instant, saw orc warbands charging and evaporating before impact, and glimpsed warp storms curling around the man without consuming him. Even the most seasoned commanders felt their authority dissolve, confronted by the unyielding weight of a presence that observed without judgment, that existed without need, and that rendered the Imperium's instruments meaningless. Amid this chaos, rumors spread faster than fleet maneuvers. Explorator, tech priests, and dataslate scribes debated endlessly whether he was a manifestation of a forgotten prototype, a godlike fragment of a long-lost Terran experiment, or a herald of some ineffable power lurking beyond the reach of the warp. Each faction colored his arrival through its own prism. Some called him a threat to the Emperor's dominion, while others whispered that he might represent an unprecedented instrument of understanding, a key to controlling the impossible turbulence of real space and the warp itself. But no one could see him clearly, nor determine his intentions, and that uncertainty gnawed at every human and machine under observation. In orbit around a quiet world scarred by centuries of industrial decay, skittery battalions reported the anomaly through crackling vox channels. Sensors flickered with irregularities that defied calibration, and automated systems generated contradictory readings that left command modules paralyzed. One skittery cohort, monitoring a manufacturing district, observed blue radiance stretching across the horizon like a silent tide. Machines halted mid-operation, as if acknowledging a superior logic beyond their understanding. Servitors froze mid-task, their prayers and litanies repeating endlessly yet incoherently, the machine spirits struggling to comprehend a presence that bent rules written into their very construction. Officers on deck glanced nervously at one another, realizing that their measured order had no purchase here. The very foundation of their certainty seemed to shift. Beneath the weight of Manhattan's quiet observation, even the custodian guards stationed on the planet's surface, paragons of the Emperor's wrath and will, hesitated. The light of his form washed over them with a calm precision that made them pause mid-step, halting their drills and formations. Their halberds, shining with ceremonial perfection, reflected his radiance as though acknowledging his authority, yet he gave none. There was no command, no imposition, only an awareness that dwarfed their centuries of training and devotion. Some whispered prayers, attempting to reconcile their faith with the inexplicable truth standing among the stars, while others simply stared, mouths slightly agape, incapable of fitting this phenomenon into the rigid structures of logic and dogma that had guided them. For generations, among the psychers, hysteria interlaced with revelation, their minds stretched and frayed under the weight of visions that were not their own. Glimpses of past and future overlapping like shattered fragments of a mirror. One senior psyker, long trained to withstand the warp's assault, fell to his knees mid-ritual, trembling. "It knows," he whispered. "It sees all, and yet it does nothing. It watches. Always." His words ricocheted across the command deck, sinking into the hearts of soldiers and officers alike. They realized that their conventional understanding of threat, of strategy, of hierarchy was irrelevant. This was not a foe to fight, nor a being to appease. He was the observer before whom the galaxy itself seemed to pause. As dread mingled with fascination, one truth became unavoidable. The Imperium, for all its fleets, psychers and custodies, had never encountered anything like him. Manhattan's presence did not demand allegiance or fear. It demanded comprehension, a comprehension the human mind was ill-equipped to provide. And in that understanding, the galaxy began to shift, not in violence, but in the quiet tremors of acknowledgement, as if every system, every crew, every soldier realized the limits of their dominion for the first time. By the time the first full fleets gathered near Manhattan's location, the Imperium had begun to fracture in its perception. Some commanders, desperate for action, urged bombardment or boarding operations, only to find their orders frustrated by failing navigation systems, malfunctioning targeting arrays, and strange gravitational anomalies that bent trajectories before any weapons could be fired. Others hesitated entirely, paralyzed by the eerie precision with which the man seemed to occupy every possible vector, observing without aggression, yet shaping outcomes by the sheer inevitability of his presence. Every act of authority was measured against a new metric, whether it could exist in the shadow of a being whose comprehension spanned beyond human reckoning. Rumors reached the higher echelons of the Imperium's bureaucracy. Tech priests debated his origin in data slate forums filled with conjecture, a remnant of lost Terran science, a fragment of the Emperor's cognition, a sentient embodiment of the laws of physics themselves. Adeptus Astra Telepathica officials catalogued visions of him, from swirling warp distortions to improbable outcomes of battles that had yet to occur, and filed them in classified archives, under Xenos anomaly observation only. Even among the whispers passed between blades like clandestine winds. He is not a threat, yet none can measure his nature. He is not God, yet mortals see in him what they cannot explain. On the ground, psychers collapsed repeatedly, overcome by simultaneities too complex for their fragile minds. They saw the Imperium's greatest victories and most crushing defeats occur in overlapping sequences, each outcome simultaneously inevitable and meaningless. Skittery soldiers, trained to obey without hesitation, found themselves hesitating as the machines within them faltered in calculation. Servitors fell into loops of repeated prayer, reciting hymns in patterns that repeated infinitely, yet never resolved. In the fleets above, human officers gritted their teeth against instruments that refused to obey. Thrusters misfiring, lights flickering, charts collapsing into unreadable arrays. The galaxy was functioning in partial comprehension, each component aware only enough to be conscious of its inadequacy. Even the orcs, distant observers through scouting reports, were briefly slowed in their frenzy. Entire currents faltered, driven back by a momentum they could neither understand nor resist. Demonic forces, sensing no fear in the figure they could not touch, recoiled just long enough to allow Imperium vessels to stabilize. Necrons, with millennia of programmed awareness, encountered calculations that did not resolve variables outside their logic. The universe itself, across races and orders, seemed to hold its breath, acknowledging the singular anomaly that had arrived without footsteps, without conflict, and yet reshaping outcomes by presence alone, in one command ship. Commander Drellin whispered to his adjutant, voice low and trembling, "Do you understand? He is not hostile, but we cannot fight him. We cannot predict him. He exists beyond our measures." The adjutant nodded, unable to form the words to capture the magnitude of that truth. Across the fleets, that same realization echoed, silent but pervasive. They were witnessing something that defied every law they had ever studied, every prayer they had ever spoken, every battle they had ever fought. It was not simply power. It was awareness manifest, quiet, absolute, and inexorably profound. And yet Manhattan did nothing. No salvo erupted, no warp storm bent unnaturally. He simply observed, moving with the infinite patience of one who has already perceived every outcome. His calm did not inspire confidence. It did not inspire fear. It simply reshaped reality, revealing the futility of the Imperium's understanding while leaving each mortal, each machine, and each psyker to confront the magnitude of their own limitations. In the end, he remained a constant, a blue lighthouse standing against the storm of human uncertainty, showing them simultaneously the fragility and the persistence of their existence. The fleets hesitated. The psykers trembled. The servitors prayed. The galaxy had encountered a force beyond its reckoning, and the Imperium's might, in all its glory, was reduced to a single, undeniable fact. Some things cannot be measured, cannot be controlled, and cannot be defeated. They could only bear witness. Even at the edge of human perception, the universe seemed to bend around him. Manhattan's presence did not announce itself with war cries or engines roar, but with a subtle shift in every measure the galaxy relied upon. Space, once a predictable expanse governed by inertia, gravity, and the ceaseless churn of the warp, felt different in his vicinity. Star systems shimmered as if hesitating in orbit. Waves of energy, once chaotic in the fringes of real space, flattened into impossible symmetry. And mortals, soldiers, psykers, tech priests, felt a strange vertigo in their minds. A sense that the rules they had devoted lives to understanding were optional, fluid, subject to observation rather than command. On the surface of a war-torn agri-world, Astra Militarum regiments paused mid-march as a distant glow appeared across the sky. It was not the flare of artillery, nor the familiar sweep of Imperial voidcraft. It was steady, absolute, and infinitely calm. Platoon commanders froze, eyes wide, trying to fit what they saw into reports, doctrines, or prayer. Even the commissars, trained to enforce unyielding obedience, hesitated, sensing that discipline meant little when confronted with a presence that did not respond to hierarchy, decree, or fear. The soldiers could feel the weight of observation, as if every action, every thought, every heartbeat was catalogued silently and unalterably in orbit. Imperial Navy cruisers experienced subtle distortions. Course corrections initiated by senior officers warped in ways they could not account for. Thrusters fired, then adjusted mid-burn without command, as if obeying a calculus that did not exist on any tactical chart. Sensors read impossibilities, warp fluctuations that did not destabilize, energy spikes that did not disperse, readings that implied both presence and absence in the same location. Psykers aboard ships murmured in fractured tongues, feeling threads of fate tug and twist around them, sensing outcomes both catastrophic and serene at once. Even the Emperor's light, the Astronomicon, pulsed in response with subtle irregularity, faintly brighter or dimmer depending on angles unseen by mortal eyes. The orcs massing their wog on a frontier world, charged in their endless lust for destruction. Their crude engines roared, their guns spat fire, and yet something in the universe's rhythm faltered around Manhattan. Squads collided with invisible resistance, momentum dissolving as though the laws of force had shifted in imperceptible increments. Their feral howls rang hollow, frustrated by a presence that did not fight, did not repel, but reshaped reality in its quiet orbit. Even when demons attempted to intervene, sensing no fear to feed upon, they recoiled in confusion, their chaotic instincts betrayed by the unnatural stillness he carried. Necron observers, ancient beyond comprehension, recorded calculations that repeatedly failed to converge. Variables outside their logic loops emerged as constants, and constants twisted unpredictably. Machines that had endured eons of entropy found themselves unable to classify the anomaly. Every protocol, every algorithm designed to predict, dominate, or annihilate fell short. Manhattan's calm created a space the galaxy could not fully occupy, a quiet impossible to disrupt, a truth impossible to catalogue. On distant planets, on drifting stations, in the flickering glow of manufacturums and the trembling of whispers spread. He does not act, yet everything changes. He exists, and it is enough to unravel certainty. The Imperium had seen uncountable horrors, understood infinite calculations of death, and yet none of it prepared them for an observer whose stillness eclipsed violence, whose detachment became a force beyond mortal comprehension. The galaxy itself seemed to contract in his presence, focusing its chaos into a single point of impossible calm. And still he moved. Unhurried, unspeaking, the eternal witness among mortals, machines and gods alike. He did not belong here, yet every entity that perceived him acknowledged the fact of his presence, felt its weight, and found themselves measured against an understanding that transcended survival, strategy, and even fear. 8 The fleets of the Imperium moved with precision that suddenly felt fragile. Even the largest vessels, their hulls bristling with macro cannons and torpedoes, faltered under subtle distortions. Calculations that once ensured perfect formations now failed to converge, leaving navigators muttering prayers they barely remembered. Manhattan's presence was not overtly hostile, yet the galaxy sensed it as a force capable of reshaping all outcomes without lifting a finger. Every ship, every car, every auger felt the quiet insistence of observation pressing on the logic of their existence. In the manufacturums of the Forge worlds, skittery legions halted mid. Augmetic's word, machines paused. Servitors repeated their litanies in looping cadence, as though time itself had momentarily folded upon Manhattan's serene focus. Tech priests attempted to interface with systems, to measure the anomaly with calculus and ritual, yet each effort returned fragmented readings or contradictions. Data slates overflowed with errors that no cogitator could resolve. The logical architecture of the Imperium bent under a presence that was simultaneously measurable and immeasurable, constant and indeterminate, a paradox made flesh in blue, on worlds scorched by orc invasions. The greenskins charged with their habitual ferocity, yet momentum faltered. Vehicles swerved without pilot input, bullets arced strangely in the air, and roars that should have broken morale instead rang hollow. Demonic entities, attuned to fear and chaos, found no resonance in this presence. Their senses screamed incongruity, forcing them to retreat or hesitate, unnerved by a stillness they could not consume. The battlefield itself, the weave of action and reaction that defined war in every corner of the galaxy, paused at the edges of his awareness. Even the Necrons, stoic beyond comprehension, found their calculations incomplete. Their centuries of observation and millennia of strategy offered no framework to account for him. Manhattan's presence introduced variables they could not resolve, constants that contradicted previous logic, and outcomes that existed in multiple states simultaneously. Tesseract-like distortions appeared in otherwise predictable trajectories. Their cold, mechanical minds recognized the anomaly as beyond threat, beyond tool, beyond any utility known. Meanwhile, psychers aboard ships and stations quivered in anticipation and fear. The warp responded differently here, its turbulence quieted, its tides arrested by a presence they could neither influence nor resist. Visions collided, past, future, and alternate present overlapping. One psyker foresaw his own death in multiple forms, yet simultaneously glimpsed the continuation of his existence. Another sensed the trajectory of 1,000 battles, each outcome certain and impossible at once. Each mind strained, some breaking under the revelation that power, chaos, and even fate were no longer consistent. Back on the guardsmen stared skyward as Manhattan moved through space, seemingly weightless yet fully present. Commanders and officers watched their carefully rehearsed doctrines dissolve. Discipline, hierarchy, ritual, all seemed trivial beneath the gaze of a being who did not act but made. Every action appears simultaneously unnecessary and incomplete. They whispered prayers and observed in awe, realizing that this anomaly was not to be confronted, not to be destroyed, not even to be understood in the way the Imperium demanded. It was simply present, and presence itself had become a force of cosmic consequence. Everywhere he passed, the galaxy faltered in recognition. Stars shimmered, warp currents slowed, orcs hesitated, psychers quaked, necrons recalculated, and imperial fleets drifted in quiet awe. Manhattan's existence was a lens through which the limitations of mortal, machine, and immortal alike became painfully visible. Even the Emperor, distant upon Terra, might have felt the subtle shift, a thread of reality reframed in the silent wake of a being who required no throne, number fleet, no worship, only observation. As the days passed, Manhattan's presence became a fixed point in the cosmos, a silent axis around which chaos, order, and mortality swirled. Fleets adjusted their courses, not because of strategy or command, but because instinct whispered of a weight they could not measure. Tactical calculations, psychovisions, and machine logic all failed to converge in the presence of his calm. The galaxy seemed to acknowledge him simultaneously as an anomaly and a constant, an observer whose existence reshaped probabilities without action. On the bridge of the flagship Imperialis Concord, officers whispered their dread. Every instrument, every display, every comlink seemed to exist only partially, as if measured against a reality Manhattan had already accounted for. Sensors reported impossible readings, star positions shifting without cause, gravity fluctuating in small yet perceptible arcs, energy pulses that contradicted both natural law and warp mechanics. Captain Alvar felt his command slip like sand through his fingers. The soldiers under him were still, the psychers trembling, and even the custodies deployed along the deck glanced at him with unease, uncertain if their training could withstand the presence of a being who rendered experience irrelevant. On the ground, Imperial guardsmen watched the distant shimmer of blue light stretching across orbit and sky. Reports filtered back of orc movements stalling, vehicles skewed, and enemy morale inexplicably faltering. The battlefield itself seemed held in suspension, paused between aggression and retreat, not by force, but by observation. The soldiers realized with an uneasy thrill that they had been participants in an unplanned demonstration, a lesson in futility, restraint, and the incomprehensible scope of a being who did not fight, yet whose presence dictated outcomes. Skittery legions, normally untiring in their obedience, paused mightily. Servitors repeated prayers endlessly, sensors and interfaces locked in recursive loops, as if struggling to measure something beyond their programming. Tech priests, once confident in the calculations of millennia, found their logic fractured by inputs that could not resolve. Every machine, every cogitator, Every automaton bowed silently to an unknown constant. Manhattan moved among them without touching, without forcing, and yet every element of the galaxy's artificial machinery bent subtly toward his awareness. Psychers on board the Imperialis Concorde collapsed repeatedly, visions crashing against one another. They saw entire fleets destroyed and saved simultaneously, battles that had not yet been fought occurring in multiple states, and even glimpses of death and survival for themselves and their comrades intertwined. Each insight carried the clarity of inevitability and the terror of impossibility. One senior psyker murmured, voice breaking, "He does not act. Yet everything changes. He observes, and the galaxy obeys." His words rippled across the bridge, unspoken yet fully understood by every conscious mind present. Even distant races felt the ripple. Necron patrols recorded inconsistencies they could not reconcile. Demons found the warp currents altered, unable to anchor themselves to fear or desire. Orcs stumbled mid-charge, momentum dissolving in a subtle, invisible field that challenged their instincts. Across the universe, living, dead, and artificial alike recognized the anomaly for what it was, not an enemy. Not a god, not a tool, a force beyond comprehension. A stillness that reshaped the rules of existence simply by being. Manhattan's figure, radiant and serene, moved slowly through the darkness, unaffected by gravitation, energy, or time as the galaxy spiraled and swayed around him. Every fleet, every regiment, every psyker and machine was caught in the reflection of his presence. His calm did not inspire obedience or worship. It inspired recognition, the realization that some forces, some existences, could not be contained by fleets, fleets' firepower, or even the Emperor's divine will. And in that recognition, the Imperium, vast, sprawling, unyielding, understood a singular, impossible truth. There were things beyond strategy, beyond prayer, and beyond comprehension. Manhattan was one of them. He did not conquer, he did not fight, he did not bend reality with violence. He merely existed, and that existence was enough to rewrite the galaxy's understanding of power, fear, and inevitability. The galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. In the outer rim, where the warp thinned into near-nothingness, navigators reported phenomena that defied comprehension. Stars shimmered with a precision they had never known, their light bending subtly as if acknowledging an unseen presence. Warp currents, normally turbulent and chaotic, flowed with an unnatural symmetry, softening in reaction to a calm that had no name. Every system, from hive worlds to forge planets, felt the pull of an observer whose cognition dwarfed mortal and machine alike. Manhattan did not act, yet the ripple of his existence reshaped reality with the quiet inevitability of a law older than the Imperium, itself in orbit around a star-scorched forge world. Adeptus Mechanicus scholars attempted to catalogue the anomaly. Data slates overflowed with paradoxes, logical matrices looping endlessly, unable to resolve his presence within their definitions of space, time, and energy. Tech priests whispered among themselves in uncharacteristic doubt, their chants faltering into fragmented prayers. Servitors ground against one another, mechanical litanies repeating in infinite recursion, as though the machines themselves sensed that the rules of cause and effect no longer applied. And yet Manhattan moved among them without touching, without coercing, merely radiating the awareness of an intelligence that rendered hierarchy, faith, and calculation simultaneously meaningless. The psychers assigned to observe him felt their minds fraying at the edges. Each vision they received contained multiple outcomes, all occurring at once, each certain and impossible simultaneously. Battles long past replayed alongside wars yet to come. Entire fleets existed in states of destruction and triumph at the same time. Even the warp itself seemed uncertain how to respond to him, its tides becoming confused, curling back on themselves in subtle distortions that threatened the fragile minds of those attuned. The Imperium's most learned scholars, chroniclers of infinite logic, stared in awe at their instruments, realizing that every measure, every calculation, every theory was inadequate. On distant worlds, soldiers and citizens sensed something deeper. It was not fear in the conventional sense, nor awe born of reverence, but a profound recognition of existence itself. People paused mid-task, eyes drawn skyward, hearts pounding with awareness of a presence that required no violence, no ritual, and yet demanded acknowledgement. Their prayers changed form, no longer pleas for protection or guidance, but whispered contemplations of the universe and its fragile, unknowable truths. Even those who had never glimpsed the figure in blue felt a subtle shift in the air, as though the very concept of observation carried weight beyond the comprehension of mortals. Among the custodies stationed on the Forge World, the effect was no less profound. They, the Emperor's chosen, paragons of discipline and will, felt a subtle recalibration in their perception of reality. Each movement, each calculation, each potential threat seemed diminished under the weight of a presence, whose awareness extended far beyond their ability to perceive or predict. Even their perfected senses, honed over millennia, struggled to measure a being whose cognition encompassed not only space and time, but the subtle threads of probability themselves. Across the Imperium's fleets, whispers spread like a contagion. Some speculated he was a fragment of the Emperor's mind, a lost shard returned from some secret calculus of creation. Others dared the heretical thought that he was something entirely outside the warp, a force beyond gods, demons, and machine logic alike. Yet all agreed upon one fact: Manhattan did not act. Yet the consequences of his existence unfolded across the galaxy with inexorable inevitability. Observation itself had become a form of influence, and the universe had begun to bend around him, silent, precise, and incomprehensible. Time, it seemed, was no longer linear in his presence. Moments repeated and overlapped, causality shimmered, and the Imperium, in all its disciplined glory, confronted the ultimate paradox. Some forces exist beyond engagement, beyond understanding, and beyond control. Manhattan was one of those forces,